Thanks so much for hearing this tonight. Many of you have already heard about this report on the various committees that it circulated to before this. We have several recommendations that are being made. One point of clarification that I would love to have is we had some discrepancy over the resolution had language to adopt the report, but most of the committees opted to accept the report. And I understand the difference between the two, but I would like to know what then would what would the council be voting on the 26th? Would they then be voting to accept or adopt? And then whatever the case that is, I really want to make sure, we have a tendency to do a lot of task forces and commissions and write reports and make recommendations, and then they end up sitting on the shelf for several years until someone does another task force and makes more recommendations. So as a community, we are very dedicated to seeing these recommendations be carried out through implementation, and the community is committed to working on implementation plans with people in the city staffers, agencies, council people, whoever it may be, to make sure that we have plans that can be acted on within the timeframes that are outlined within the report. I've had a really difficult time understanding what the process is, and I found that many staff and council people have also had trouble understanding, what are next steps, what are our strategic next steps to take this to the implementation phase. Many committees requested a fiscal analysis. The resolution approving this task force it states that the task force should dissolve once the report is accepted, but then now we're thinking about what next step or what resolution needs to come through to make sure that we do take this to the next implementation phase, or is there someone to assign it to, or do we need to have a resolution to get a new task force to work on implementation? So I'm wondering if this committee can either provide some guidance or let me know who would be the best person to talk to about this sort of thing, because we don't want to see this just get voted on and then move on. We want to make sure it moves through. So I definitely appreciate you taking the time, reading the report, and considering the recommendations in it, and I welcome any questions that you have.
Questions? I'll receive it without.
Thank you so much, Rush, for great work and a lot of work, and apologies for confusions on processes, which unfortunately are common. The one thing that I did note, so my understanding was the majority of the committees took an action to accept the report and not to adopt it. Although the language of there is like a contradiction in the document itself, because the title is accepting, but then now therefore the result is an adopt. So so maybe we can ask the city attorney to clarify the difference between accepting and adopting.
Certainly. And you ought to make those consistent. I didn't realize that they weren't. Accepting the report means that you receive the report, you agree with its conclusions, and that's what it means. Adopting the report means that everything in there you are adopting as city policy and will expect everybody to carry out. So, for example, if there's a recommendation to hire somebody, you are expecting somebody to go out and hire that person. I don't know what all the recommendations are in there, but that's basically the difference, is that the ones that are accepted as city policy are then expected to be carried out. So.
And it's the sentiment of the task force that we would get to a point where we'd have that level of commitment for adopting recommendations.
So can I do a couple other questions? So now I wanted that to be clear from the inception. And then I have some questions about the recommendations. So one of the recommendations is the hiring of a staff that would really be responsible for entertainment and equity. Was there a discussion during the task force about whether that could be, so as you know, and I know it came up in the task force, there used to be a staff member in the mayor's office that was alcohol and food policy. And then that position description was changed,
right.
And it became just food policy. And then a somebody was added in the clerk's office to just deal with the clerical part of alcohol. So was there a discussion about whether there was did that position need to be just focused on this, or was there a place where you saw synergy of that position with some other position or some other role within the city?
Yeah, that's a critical position because that's really what allowed, myself and others from the hip hop community to engage with city staffers. So back in 2009, there's a timeline mentioned in the report. We're able to connect with Mark Wolf, who had that position at the time, and that's what led to further discussions and a list of best practices and actions that could be taken. So without that staffing position, we would not have had that direct connection with the community necessarily, or it would have been more difficult. So the position that's recommended in here, I suppose that could be part of their duties. This also did come up at the Alcohol License and Review Committee, and there was also confusion on our part as to whether or not what we submitted to circulate to committees was the final report, and the task force was under the impression that we would be able to include suggestions from the committees to the report that would go to council, and then we found out that was not the case. So it would have been good if we could have taken that discussion from the ALRC, and then I don't know if we can add that as an attachment or an amendment to this to add on, but there were a couple of things that came up from committees that would be a good idea to either modify some of the recommendations or add to it. And I looked at the attachments that were on this agenda item coming to the committee, and I saw that there were detailed notes from MAC, but there was a listing that committees accepted the report, but I didn't see if there were any notes or minutes that accompanied that, that could inform the committee or the council about where we were going with this or what other committees wanted to see with that recommendation. So I'm not sure how to handle that.
And then my one other question about that position, and I'm done with questions after that, was that you clearly also had a discussion about this position needing to be in the mayor's office.
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell me more about that?
Sure. So this was a long discussion that we had about where would the best place for this person be. And the reason we chose the mayor's office was because this individual needs to interact with a number of different agencies and departments within the city to be effective. And so if they were, say, to be located in the parks office or in the clerk's office, that position might then take on roles that are more central to that specific office and might not have the same ability to move back and forth. So this person would not only be looking at things like how does the community know how to access applications for festival permits or sound permits and things like that, but they would also be making sure the community knows how to access the ALRC process, and if they wanted to open a venue that needed an entertainment license, do they know how to access that process? This position is really there to really function as a bridge between the community and the city offices. And so we determined that if it was in a more central location like the mayor's office, it would give it a little bit more ability to kind of to put interest and energy into many different areas.
And then the last small, but in the recommendation, it says that the person in the position, which is recommendation 1, it says equity in arts and entertainment, and I'm assuming it meant music and entertainment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alder Campbell?
So I'll also apologize on behalf of the city for the process confusions and, maybe you're not getting the resources you need to understand what you were doing and how to do it. And in another ad hoc task force, we're working on that, on solutions to that. And in fact, as we talk about this position, I think this proposed position might really fit well into another proposal we're coming out with from the task force on government structure. Anyway, I did, when this came before Transportation Policy and Planning Board, I did note that a substitute may need to be may need to be done of this, just to change that language, which is in the minutes. So if you see on the Legistar items, some of the minutes and discussions related to this item are in Legistar in the history, and again, apologies on behalf of the city of how difficult it
Yeah,
is
that's a whole other
to navigate
conversation.
Legistar, and hopefully our new innovation in city government will cover that as well. But, so I think that's one thing. Something else at TPTB, we were actually looking for something like this document, which, I mean, thank you staff if you created this, and the committee or whomever, but this wasn't available to us when I last saw it.
I don't know.
That's from Mac.
Oh, the one from Mac.
Oh, this
Okay.
is from Mac, this is,
Yes.
so this isn't,
And
these are
Mac,
the Macs.
right, they took line by, went through it line
So
by line.
what we were thinking in that other one was not only do you put time, should there be time horizons on recommendations, which is, again, I think why the committees were saying, well, accept rather than adopt, was because there were really no timeframes or budget, like a finance note on the items, which in order to adopt, I feel like the council really needs to have all of that information at our disposal. And if that's, I think that the plan B is for council to accept this, and then to have separate resolutions for each piece of them, which is more work because the task force, the task force is disbanded. But to have some, maybe the alder who was it? Alder Martin?
Yeah.
Work with Alder Martin to get things in the pipeline, in the legislative pipeline, so we can have the, timeframe and budget and all the information for each discrete piece. But, as you said, I mean, that's not optimal, but it's a way forward.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just for the record, I do want to say, like, we did have full support of our staff from Civil Rights, Martha, who's here, and, provided excellent support. But we didn't have,
But
we
it was
had
just
very
Martha,
minimal
though.
resources,
Yeah, right.
and in her schedule, so we didn't have the resources to go detailed into a fiscal analysis and, where specifically things would come from.
Yeah, and Martha, I hope you don't take this the wrong way. I'm saying Martha should have had more support.
Right.
She shouldn't have been the only staff
Right.
doing it. Yeah.
Alderman McCain?
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the points that you brought up, and there was question about where should this position fit, question about who to consult with, and then a clarity of policy procedure, and so a lot of things popped up, and so there's still a lot of work involved in this, and I wanted to ask in terms of our analyst, since we have an analyst now, how would that person fit? Because you're saying send it back to the alder to do all the pieces. There's still a lot of work to do, and the committee is now disbanded, I heard.
Once it's accepted, then it's dissolved per
Okay.
the original resolution.
So it's accepted and adopted, so still there's some consistency work that needs to be done. Obviously, there's still a lot of tasks associated with this to get done, and who does this sit with? And so my question is would this be appropriate to have our legislative analysts to kind of, usher, and you'll have the who, that you can really track it and then bring it back. So this is my ask. I don't know if that's what I'm asking for clarification.
I think the alder can take it on with the legislative analyst. That would
Okay.
be my suggestion. Alder Carter?
I was just going to say that although that the committee is basically disbanded after we accept it, which we all know, that Karen, you're still around.
Yeah.
Unless you're leaving town tonight. So I think that with the alder and our analysts, that we'll be able to get this through the pipeline and fine tune it. So I think we're in good hands.
So, Martha,
Yes.
do you wanted to say something or no?
I can answer questions, but.
Okay, all right, very good. Obviously, Vida.
So I guess it's not a question, so I take it back. Are we ready for a motion? And then I want to make a comment. I'm thinking that it wasn't a question.
Any further questions?
I actually do have a question that might tee up.
Dr. Campbell?
Would, if we referred this so that the committee could stay in place for a while to collectively do some of that work, would that, do you think the committee would be able to meet and get quorum and would want to work on this as a committee? Or?
I don't know if there might be some positions that would turn over, but there's probably a couple of people that committed to that time frame and would not renew. There are several people like myself who would continue to do it, to work on this, so.
Go ahead, Dr.
So I'm going to make a motion to accept the report with an amendment to the language of the resolution that changes the last bit resolve clause, the word adopt to accept.
Second.
That's as good as a substitute. So can I make a comment on that motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I actually, sorry, crazy, but I actually think that the person that should oversee the implementation, now that we accept this, that to really work on the pieces of it should be the chief of staff. I think some of it is going to require our analysts to analyze further. Some of the recommendation that need a little bit more delving into details, but some of them are also pretty straightforward and just need maybe like a resolution with a fiscal note attached to it, right? So I do think that it would, I would say that it's more Kwesi's role to oversee the implementation. I don't want to put additional work on some very, very dedicated residents who have done this for as volunteers for us, but I would say that Kwesi should consult with Karen and other key members of the committee back and forth so that we utilize your time in the most effective way as opposed to more committee meetings, which I shouldn't say that, maybe there are sometimes effective ways. But I feel that that's, you've done some really enormous amount of work, and that's what we should be doing as next steps, is to take every recommendation and say, okay, does this, when is a good time? Is it for the budget of 2020 that we put the position and we'll just put it in there, or request it, or however way the different pieces need to be worked out, and do it that way. And I think some of them are more immediate, some of them certainly need some more long-term conversations. A lot of them are NPD related, which, as you know, there is, like, again, we need to make sure as a council that we pass that along, but there may be very limited role that we have to play in implementing those. It's really, really MPDs.
Dr. McCain?
So listening to,
Sorry, HR.
Oh, please go ahead.
okay, so listening to my colleagues, and so one of the reasons that the chief of staff has an analyst is to make those assignments in terms of duties and responsibilities. And so shifting this back to the chief of staff to determine how to allocate those resources. I really want to make sure that we're clear on that, because that's exactly what the channel is, and that's exactly why we have an analyst, and so that analyst fits under the chief of staff. And so I would strongly recommend that we refer this back to the chief of staff, who will make those assignments in terms of what tasks that the analyst will pick up. But solely, one of the things I heard clearly is the who. I mean, you're still going to be at the table. You're absolutely, whether other members of the committee will be on task or not. I know that you will be at the table.
Right, and several will.
And several will, but it is really important that this rests in your plate to allocate what needs to be done, and then to come back and say, this is what we've discovered, and it'll be a clearer representation of the work that we can do and what will be before us. And so that's a kind of a friendly amendment to you, the maker. You made a motion. motion, so.
I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
not part of
It's
the
the same.
amendment, but it's definitely saying for the
We
record that
haven't voted on the motion.
Kwesi is gonna be
No, we have
taking
the amendment and the amendment.
leadership on
Okay.
implementation piece of this.
All right, Harper?
I just want, it sounds like there has been some discussion in regards to creating a new position. I just
Right.
want to make my folks available too. I know it sounds like the landing spot was the mayor's office, and there are definitely some positives, but there are also some
Right.
reasons why you may want to consider a different location as well. But either way, if it's just, having the discussion and creating a position classification based on the recommendations that folks come up with.
Kwesi?
I was just going to say that it will be a collaborative effort, and to Harper's point, part of it will be kind of talking to TFOGs, talking to HR, talking to MPD, and kind of getting the capacities and everything together, and then also working with the analysts, we can figure out how it's been executed and implemented in other municipalities, and then bring all that to the table. So.
All right, so I just want to remind everybody that we have a presentation at 5:45. So further discussions on these questions? All right, so we now vote on the substitute. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. All right, so we have the main motion before us as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. All right, so the report is accepted.